Ethan Green was a 42-year-old man who lived an unremarkable life in Kansas City, Missouri. He worked a mundane job as a delivery driver, navigating the city's streets day in and day out. He'd always been a quiet, unassuming person, but beneath his calm exterior, a storm had been brewing for years. The world had changed around him. People no longer spoke to each other. They were too engrossed in their phones, lost in the shallow depths of social media. He saw it everywhere he went, at work, in the grocery store, at the park. It infuriated him, the way people seemed to care more about virtual validation than real human connection. One Friday evening, after a particularly grueling day of work, Ethan snapped. He was walking home, his mind racing with thoughts of how disconnected the world had become, when he saw a young woman almost step into traffic, eyes glued to her phone. Something inside him broke. It was as if all the pent-up rage and frustration he'd been harboring for years had finally reached a boiling point. Without thinking, he lunged at the woman, yanking the phone from her hand and throwing it to the ground. She screamed in surprise and fear, but Ethan didn't stop. His hands trembled with fury as he lashed out, his fists connecting with her face. Blood splattered, and her screams echoed through the night. Passers-by shouted and ran to help, but Ethan had already disappeared into the shadows. That night, Ethan lay in bed, his heart still pounding. He couldn't believe what he'd done, but a part of him felt justified. These people needed to wake up, to see the world around them. They needed to understand that life was passing them by while they were lost in their screens. The next morning, Ethan woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He knew what he had to do. He dressed in dark clothes, pulling a baseball cap low over his face, and set out into the city. His first target was a man sitting on a park bench, oblivious to the world around him as he scrolled through his phone. Ethan approached him silently, his heart racing with adrenaline. He grabbed the man's phone and smashed it against the bench, then turned his rage on the man himself. Fists flew, blood spilled, and within moments, Ethan had disappeared once more, leaving chaos in his wake. For the next 3 days, Ethan wreaked havoc across Kansas City. He targeted anyone he saw engrossed in their phones, anyone who seemed more connected to the digital world than the real one. He attacked with a ferocity that shocked even himself. Each act of violence felt like a release, a way to vent the anger and frustration that had built up inside him for so long. News of the attack spread quickly. The media dubbed him the phone vigilante, a shadowy figure striking fear into the hearts of those who dared to look at their screens. The police were on high alert, but Ethan was careful. He moved swiftly and silently, blending into the crowds and disappearing before anyone could react. On the third day, Ethan felt a strange sense of satisfaction. He had made his point. People were talking to each other again, if only to share their fear of him. But he knew it couldn't last. The police were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before they caught him. That evening, as the sun set over Kansas City, Ethan spotted his final target, a teenage girl standing at a bus stop, eyes glued to her phone. He approached her, heart pounding, but as he reached out to grab the phone, he heard a shout. "Police! Freeze!" Ethan turned to see a group of officers running toward him, guns drawn. Panic surged through him, and he bolted, shoving the girl aside and sprinting down the street. The police gave chase, their shouts echoing through the night. Ethan ran for his life, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the sirens behind him, see the flashing lights reflected in shop windows. Desperation drove him forward, but he knew he couldn't outrun them forever. He spotted a car idling at a red light and made a split-second decision. He yanked the driver out and jumped behind the wheel, slamming his foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, tires screeching, and he sped through the city streets with the police hot on his tail. The chase was chaotic, cars swerving to avoid him as he raced through intersections and tore down narrow streets. Ethan's mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination. He couldn't go back to his old life. He couldn't be caught. As he approached the city bridge, an idea took hold. If he could just get across, he might lose them in the maze of streets on the other side. But as he sped onto the bridge, he saw the barricade of police cars waiting for him. There was no escape. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he accelerated, the car hurtling toward the edge of the bridge. The police shouted, their voices lost in the roar of the engine and the rush of blood in his ears. And then, with a final, desperate scream, Ethan drove the car off the bridge. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The world hung suspended around him, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. The car hit the water with a tremendous splash, the impact jolting Ethan violently. Water surged in through the shattered windows, and he struggled to free himself from the seatbelt. Panic clawed at his mind, but he couldn't move fast enough. The water was rising, cold and relentless. As the car sank deeper into the river, Ethan's thoughts grew hazy. He could see the police lights above the surface, could hear the muffled shouts and sirens. But it was too late. Darkness closed in, and with a final, shuddering breath, Ethan Green was gone. The city of Kansas City mourned the lives lost and the violence that had gripped them for those 3 days. The story of the phone vigilante became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the dangers of letting anger and frustration consume you. And in the quiet depths of the river, the car lay still, a dark secret hidden beneath the waters, the final resting place of a man who had snapped and brought terror to a city. There was no happy ending, no resolution. Just a lingering sense of loss and the haunting memory of those 3 days of chaos.